با درود و سپاس به هموطنان عزیز و با تشکر از برگزارندگان برنامه امروز به خصوص خانم الهی امانی. I'm honored and privileged to be here on behalf of the Iranian American Lawyers Association. The Iranian American Lawyers Association is the first Iranian American Lawyers Association which was established in 1994 and is a non-profit organization made up of attorneys, law students, and judges. IALA is an affiliate member of the Los Angeles County Bar Association, the largest bar association in the United States. We at IALA wholeheartedly believe in equal rights, access to justice, due process, and protection of civil rights and liberties for all Americans alike. IALA's mission, amongst many others, is uniting for a collective action, maintaining honor and integrity in legal profession, providing pro bono legal services, as well as actively establishing an understanding and agreement in policy and practice with city, county, state, and federal law enforcement regarding due process and access to counsel. IALA is also a member of multicultural advisory committees of the FBI, Department of Homeland Security, and local law enforcement agencies. Shortly after the June 12th elections in Iran, and in light of news and reports related to the demonstrations and peaceful protests of the Iranian people in Iran in opposition to the legitimacy of the presidential election results and the documented and broadcasted continued and ongoing human rights violations of the unprecedented number of Iranian protesters, the Iranian American Lawyers Association on June 15th issued its press release condemning the violence against peaceful protesters and called on to the United Nations to appoint an independent commission to immediately look into the ongoing human rights violations of peaceful protesters in Iran, to demand an immediate stop of all human rights violations of the demonstrators, and to investigate and address the voting irregularities in order to respect the vote of the Iranian people. On June 24th, the Board of Directors of the Iranian American Lawyers Association, expressing support for all peaceful Iranian protesters in Iran who exercise and respect the value of their freedom, human rights, and civil liberties, resolved and announced the following resolution: condemning the use of violence against Iranian demonstrators by the government and pro-government militias, expressing its demand for immediate cessation of all violence against the Iranian demonstrators, condemning the ongoing government suppression of independent electronic communication through interference with the communications, internet, and cell phones. Also condemning the expulsion and arrest of news reporters and suppression of free press. We acknowledge and affirm the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the importance of democratic and fair elections, and we express our demand for an immediate appointment of an independent commission to identify the human rights violations of the Iranian protesters, to include relief and release of all Iranian protesters who were arrested, to determine the identity of the human rights violators, to identify the violations, to redress the grievances and to cause remedies for the victims and their families, and to investigate and address the voting irregularities in order to respect the vote of the Iranian people. Shortly thereafter, on June 23rd, IALA issued the following petition to the United Nations, which I ask each and every one of you. There's some petitions here that are going around, but you can go online on ialawyers.org. We do not require last name, last initial will suffice. So far we have gathered over 1,000 signatures, and we hope by this publicity and others to increase that number tenfold, and by September forward it to the United Nations. The petition was addressed to the UN Secretary General and to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights with this preamble: when the violence erupted in the streets of Iran, and as soon as the first signs of human rights violations against peaceful Iranian protesters surfaced, IALA issued a demand and approved it as a resolution on June 24th, calling for an independent commission to oversee and address the continued human rights violations occurring in Iran, amongst other issues. Both the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate have already voiced their concerns and House Resolution 560 and Senate Resolution 196, supporting the values of freedom and the individual rights and condemning the violence. Honorable Secretary General and High Commissioner, we, the undersigned, urge that you consider the illegitimacy that will be naturally driven from a non-transparent body or commission that investigates the deaths and other human rights violations in Iran. It is of utmost importance that the democratic legitimacy of any purported government in Iran be transparent, and the only way to have transparency that will cease the violence and investigate the human rights violations is through an unbiased and independent commission appointed by the United Nations. We urge that you immediately appoint an independent commission to identify the human rights violations of the Iranian protesters, to include relief and release of all Iranian protesters who were arrested, to determine the identity of the human rights violators, to redress their grievances and to cause remedies for the victims and their families, and to investigate and address the voting irregularities in order to respect the vote of the Iranian people. Furthermore, a call for an immediate meeting of the permanent members of the UN Security and the General Assembly, signatories to the Article 3 of the United Nations Convention Against Torture, to adopt and pass a resolution condemning the Islamic Republic government's cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment of Iranian citizens. The sooner the United Nations takes aggressive and independent action against the continued heinous human rights violations in Iran that they have shocked and moved the entire world, the more lives that we can save. This resolution was adopted amongst other organizations by the Multicultural Bar Alliance of California, made up of 17 bar and lawyers association, amongst them the Arab American lawyers, the Asian Pacific American women lawyers, the Black women lawyers, the Italian American lawyers, the Japanese American bar, the Korean bar, the Latino bar, the Mexican American bar, the Filipino American bar, the South Asian bar, and so forth. With their support, we are working through our liaisons with the American Bar Association to build support there and to encourage the ABA, the American Bar Association, to take on this issue on a nationwide basis. What is clear is that certain rights, including human rights, are inalienable values and principles engraved in every democracy, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion and press, access to counsel, and due process of citizens are not negotiable. People who exercise these rights must be free from arrests, tortures, and killings. All those who have been detained for exercising their rights must be unconditionally released. And all those who have violated the basic human rights of peaceful protesters must be brought to justice. All those who have been harmed, including their families, must have their grievances redressed and have their day in court. We appreciate the solidarity and the unity around human rights issues and its importance. We applaud all organizations who have taken steps to address the human rights violations of the Iranian people, and we invite all of you to sign on this petition to the United Nations calling for establishing or appointing of an independent commission. In closing, we extend our gratitude to the organizers, especially Mrs. Elahe Amani and all the UCLA students, and our own organizations, Zohre Mizrahi, Mike Manish, and Rafiq Eivazi, for their relentless efforts and assistance in this matter.